Hi, I'm Christian Piatt, co-host of the Homebrewed Christianity Culture Cast, and I am joined today by William Paul Young, author of The Shack, as well as Reba Riley, author of the forthcoming Post-Traumatic Church Syndrome. We are all three going to be participating in a short tour together in the Pacific Northwest called Where's God When? It's a full stage production, multimedia production with music, video, all kinds of cool stuff, storytelling that addresses the question, where is God in the midst of profound pain and loss? And how do we find hope and healing? And so instead of doing that through a 5 easy steps to never hurt again or any, kind of nonsense like that sounds good but isn't really substantive or real, we're going to share our own stories about pain and loss and where we've found hope and healing. So I just wanted to bring you all on here to talk a little bit about why it is that you felt drawn to this story or drawn to this idea.
I feel that brokenness and loss is something that I never heard a whole lot of sermons about. It's not a happy. It's obviously not a happy subject, and so we don't really learn tools like to deal with our pain and our sorrow and our loss. And so when I was going through a season of profound brokenness, both physically with a chronic illness and then spiritually with what I call post-traumatic church syndrome, a condition of spiritual injury, I didn't have, I felt I was all alone. I felt I was alone, and I don't know that I had the tools to know that God was with me. And so by being able to go out with Paul and Christian, it's just this amazing opportunity to share the story, to first and foremost tell people you are not alone and God is with you in your brokenness.
Paul, how about you? You have a pretty amazing story growing up.
I think everybody has a pretty amazing story once you get past the presentation. And
Yeah.
we're so used to that way of relating to each other that it takes a little while to sometimes get past into the holy ground of somebody's story. I think loss is something that we all share. It's a language that we all resonate with, and if you haven't to this point in your life, just hang around a bit.
Right.
It's on its way.
It's coming tomorrow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's a very common language that, as Reba was saying, does not get talked a lot about. And in fact, for some of us who grew up in a more fundamental religious environment, to be that authentic was even to be wrong in some sense. And so a lot of us didn't learn how to communicate our losses or let people into that space. We didn't even think that sort of thing was either right or especially safe. And a lot of us did not experience a sense of safety within the context of being authentic. So, but it is common to us. So I'm excited about the whole opportunity to utilize story as also common language in order to frame a conversation about something that matters to every single person, and that is loss, and what to do with loss, how to learn to communicate our loss in such a way. I think the Shack did it and Crossroads did it, inviting people in such a way that said, you know what, your tears actually matter. They not just matter to you, they matter to us all. And so let's find a way for you to adopt language that will help you communicate to us your story and therefore who you are. I think, and it raises up all the questions about the goodness of God and the sovereignty of God and the power of God and all of those along the way as well.
So some of this is about permission giving, modeling for people the vulnerability, right?
Yes.
That we want people to kind of enter into with each other, because if we can do it in front of, say, 1,000 people, then maybe it's not quite so scary to do that with a loved one or a friend or something like that. But it reminds me of we talk about how it's not talked about much in church, but it reminds me of Brene Brown, who is internationally known these days for talking about vulnerability.
Yes.
and shame. And
Yes.
she even gets these invitations from large corporations to come and speak to their entire companies, but they say, "No, we don't want you to talk about shame and vulnerability." She says, "What do you want me to talk about, badminton, or what? What exactly is your?"
Hey, don't diss badminton. I played a lot of it.
Well,
And
and maybe there's shame and vulnerability attached to
Oh.
badminton playing. I have no idea, but it's funny. I think it's something. It's this veneer of perfection rather than revealing true authenticity through vulnerability that our entire culture, our entire society has become used to. That when somebody asks you how you are, you just say fine, and if you say more than that, you're really kind of not getting the cultural exchange. So how do we start really getting people to that place of being vulnerable to one another while also not just dwelling in that pain, dwelling in that suffering and loss, and letting it define who we are? Reba, how do you feel about that?
Well, one of my wonderful editors, Jana Reese, she told me when I was writing my memoir, if you are willing to stand in the public square and show your scars, it will give people the courage to show their own. And when you can show that you've healed, it gives them hope that they can too. And that really stuck with me while I was writing, because I think it's that aspect of the permission giving. By sharing my story, I give you permission to begin sharing yours. And so really it's having, I mean, I guess for me, the courage to be vulnerable and to say, this is where I was broken. This is where I am broken even. What do you have to say, Paul?
I agree. I think authenticity allows for authenticity. I think a lot of us, again, who grew up within the testimonial idea,
Yes.
which was really propaganda. We had to have a hook, or you had to have an agenda behind it rather than just simple authenticity. I think the simplicity of a human story is much profound than any form of propaganda. And unfortunately, we began to use story as a means to an end rather than to an expression of personhood. And a lot of us sort of got caught up in that kind of world. I think the authentic human story is incredibly more profound. And we look at scripture all the time and we say, look at all the broken people, as if we're not. And yet that's part of why it's so beautiful to us, is because there is an authentic humanity to the expression of imperfection within the brokenness of our beings that is allowed within Scripture that oftentimes we don't even allow within ourselves. And as Christian was saying, I think we live in a culture of performance. So this is about my persona and my presentation. It's like you don't really want to know my person. You would prefer, or I would prefer, that we create some form of performing so that's what you relate to, because anything else is way more scary, and it's too real for a lot of us. We'd rather have the imagination of relationship than take the risks of actually having one.
What drew you to where you are now, spiritually, emotionally, and how would you define, and I don't mean put a label on it, but how would you articulate kind of where you are in your journey of spirituality at this point, given all of that to inform who you are today?
I'm going to have to quote Paul Young on this.
Oh, good call. Good call.
Paul Young says the only time you'll find God in a box is because he wants to be in there with you. And what I have found in my survey, I guess you would say, of these religions is that they're all boxes. They're all trying to take something that is so big and so beautiful and put it into small terms, because that's what we do, because we're human. But God is bigger than all of our boxes. But he's also in all of them with us. So as far as, where I'm at, I can walk in and worship with anyone. Because what I see now is that the intention behind the worship is to reach this something greater, God that is so much bigger than we are. And if you can get in touch with that intention, even if the practices are unfamiliar, even if you disagree with their politics or their, whatever, fill in the blank, if you can see that intention, it unites your heart. with the people that you're worshiping with. So I really can walk in anywhere and worship with people.
Obviously, your book, The Shack, sold over 20 million copies to people. How do you see? I'm sure that you get overwhelmed in good or even bad ways by people wanting to share their own story with you and how the Shack connected with them.
Yeah.
How do you see the work that we do as authors and speakers as complementary to or in opposition to what's being sold, so to speak, in corporate, social media, or religious America?
I think we're talking now about, in part, the distinction between creativity and propaganda, where creativity it actually opens up space for people. It has a profound respect, and it is not with an agenda that is preset as far as outcomes. I think good creativity does that. It's one of the values of fiction versus nonfiction. Nonfiction has some incredible value. I love it, and I depend on it a lot. People who really have focused and spent a lot of time working on specific kinds of words and subjects. I'm profoundly grateful for what they contribute. But the point of nonfiction is to reduce space. It is to convince you of the space that I dwell in. And everybody understands that. Fiction or creativity of any sort, whether it's music or dance or sculpting or, plowing a field or whatever, creativity is designed to open space up. And a lot of times, if it's good creativity, it will create more space than it actually uses. And it's an invitation for people to hear whatever they're going to hear, because people are on a journey themselves, and I trust that the Holy Spirit is active in their lives, that they're going to be able to hear for themselves. I can't heal anybody, and I can't save anybody, which was a huge relief. It took me only 50 years to figure that one out, but it was a huge relief. I don't have a responsibility in that sense as a person who is participant in a creative process for outcomes. I don't. It's too big for me. I get to be the child that plays in this, and then have the respect that others will hear what they hear. It just happened that the authenticity of what I've written has profoundly impacted and found a way to be indwelling other people's holy ground, and it's given them space. So I'm overwhelmed in a very positive sense with people and their stories, and how my little story that was written for my own children has intersected theirs in such a way as allowed me participation and permission to be there. And as a result, they send me thousands of stories, which I love. And we're working to figure out how do we make those stories accessible, because every single person matters. It's about the one, and then it's about the one who is in community. So all of those things work for me in terms of the honor of participation inside this space.
In a way, what we're talking about, I think, that I kind of play with in my most recent book, Post-Christian, is the difference between deductive thought or dialogue versus inductive. Whereas the modern church, and even almost back to the beginning of Christianity, to begin with, has been principally built on the deductive process of orthodoxy and indoctrinating people with right belief, because that is really the main way in which religion as an institution or a system can maintain control. But if we release that control and focus on creativity and inductive processes, then the good part is that we're opening that up, and we're broadening the tent, so to speak.
Yeah.
But we're also asking those institutions to let go of an awful lot of control. So I wonder, for either of you, maybe Reba, you could start. Have you sensed that kind of pushback, or that that what you're talking about, even if it may seem very fundamental and intuitively part of human nature, some pushback that what you're offering or what you're proposing or modeling is a real threat to institutions like religion. Have you experienced that yet?
Well, yes. I think it's scary for people to hear a story that is outside their, that threatens their story. It really doesn't, but that's how they feel. By telling my story of how I left my faith and then came back to it in a very route that was like a sort of like a circle. It's scary for people because I don't begrudge anyone their security, because when you have to let go of those things, or when you are forced to let go of them, it's a really, really, really hard thing. It's very painful, and for me, that's where the trauma in post-traumatic church syndrome comes from. Because when you're letting go of that, that's your foundation. That's what everything else is built on, and you've been told that there's nothing else. It's this way or the highway, and so yeah, of course, it's really scary. People want to look at me and say, "Well, she never really knew God." I hear that. She never really knew God. She was never really a Christian. They want to invalidate my story because it threatens theirs, and that's okay, because maybe my story isn't the right thing for them at the right time, but I'm telling it because it is going to be driving permission for other people, the people that do need to hear it. Other authors, Paul included, of course, by sharing his creative gifts, and Christian, yours as well, and other authors, by sharing their stories, it gave me permission to do what I did. And so I'm just trying to give that gift back.
Religion's an easy target. It really is. If you're going to go after something and you're going to want easy self-justification for doing it, religion's a good target.
Yeah.
But the same conversation applies to science, where you've got an objective, hard material reality that you are forming ideas and opinions around. And for a long time, our tradition was that fact is brute. And if you really understand the facts of it, then you understand the truth of it. Well, that's changing very rapidly. So the same kind of sense of being unsteady and the same kind of reactions are arising around the objective determinism of brutal science in that sense. And so you have, Michael Polanyi, and you have a whole bunch of other folks that are talking about indwelling as a part of knowing, that our participation, you cannot just have some objective sort of scientism that is how you frame everything. Well, that's what we did in religion. We had our set of propositions, and we had our systematic theologies that then would define everything, but somehow the person got lost in it. And that's happened in science, it's happened in religion, it's happening in every area and arena of human participation: economics, social theology, philosophy. You went through the logical positivism, where we're trying to get down to the very definitions of and you find out that inside that our humanity is lost. So, but we create structures around that certainty, and we're talking about relationship, which is a mystery to begin with. And every married person will tell you that it's entering into a mystery and it's losing control. And fear is an invitation to either control or trust. And, we're used to trusting a set of ideas or propositions. The idea of a relationship, that's really shaky ground comparatively. Sorry.
Well, and I think we've seen this in waves and cycles throughout global culture. Of course, for our reality, mostly here in North America, we see the influence of modernism since the Enlightenment, that has basically said there's a clear delineation of right and wrong, and even a valuative good and bad kind of line that you can establish within any discipline, which creates fundamentalism of any stripe. I think, like politics, philosophy, science, religion. And it's that deductive thought and rationality kind of process that we try to use to pin something down. But then, yeah, we've started to conflate fact with truth, like you were saying, Paul. And then we put that lens on the Bible, which is ironic in some ways, because once we get to the Gospels, it's really hard to hold on to that sort of idea if we're really taking to heart not just the words that Jesus offered, but the intent behind them. Because what the religious scholars and legalists were trying to do at the time was to use this deductive framework of the law to say, are you inside or outside of the law? And he said, well, I'm going to open this back up and offer a third way to talk about this, which is through story. It's very similar to what Fred Craddock did for so many years as such a brilliant pastor, which was to lean on story as the primary way to convey the truth at a gut level that people were searching for. Now, one of the things that as an author or as authors we give up in that way is control over how people interpret our work, and even possibly those more modernist thinking people even try to use what we have used to try to be more inductive and open it up, to then use it to say, okay, deductively we can tell within this greater truth that the fact is XYZ.
Yeah.
So how do we deal with that as creative people, that people are going to use our work and our ideas in ways we never intended in the first place?
We celebrate it. That's what we do with it.
I think you got to let that go. It's you're letting that work go into the world. And
I think it's beyond letting it go. I think it's celebrating it, because people will hear things that I never intended, and they're things that are great and wonderful and true, and they will hear things inside their own paradigms that obviously I didn't intend. Actually, maybe the opposite of what the facts of the language are. But that's okay, because it's raising up a set of questions that they wouldn't otherwise interact with. An angry person is at least engaged. So an ambivalent person just doesn't care. There is no conversation there. But an angry person, that's somebody who is actually entering into the conversation in one way or another. And if I'm not at risk in that conversation as part of the creative process, if I'm not at risk, there can be a real conversation, because that person actually matters more than the argument or what they're presenting as the cover for their fear, or which is usually what it is. They're afraid of something, or they want to make a declaration that something actually matters to them, that is precious to them. And I have a friend who begins many of his conversations with someone with the statement, at the end of our conversation, I want everything that is precious to you now to not be less precious. And I love that, because it's saying, you mean more to me than any debate or argument here. And now we're back into a relationship. Theology is a wonderful thing, and ideas are wonderful things. They are, science. It depends on this reality that is definable. And we're not going to create outside of the laws of language, because then it becomes incoherent. But there is so much more going on inside of this, because everything is fundamentally relational. And that goes back to my embracing of the fact that there is relationship within the very being of God that we then get to explore. And indwelling becomes a part of everything we do, whether it's science or economics or mothering or fathering or friending or being single or whatever.
And this does get at the heart of something that I think is sort of stirring within our collective spiritual conversations and identities, which is kind of reimagining the authority of God, the authority of Scripture, and just embracing something at least possibly new in our understanding of authority as a whole. Because, like you talked about sovereignty initially, a lot of times we kind of use authority and sovereignty as synonymous. But rather than looking at, previously maybe we've considered authority to be authoritative, which is distinct and clear line drawing and rule making, as God the great rule maker, rather than God as author, like we've just talked about, the vulnerability of creating something precious and then setting it free to become whatever it will of its own volition.
Yeah.
And so in that way, it's more of a great invitation into engagement, meaningful engagement. That we can look at something like the first words in John. In the beginning was the Word. And so I think that that's really exciting, and I think through the kind of storytelling that we're doing in this Where's God When tour, we're inviting people in a very exciting and not really threatening way, but just in some
very accessible,
and to dive into this sort of common narrative which all of humanity takes part. And I'm really excited to see how people respond to it and what comes of it even after we take these visits to Spokane, Washington on May 15th, Seattle May 16th, and or Bothell, yes, and then Portland, Oregon on May 17th. And if all goes well, knock on wood, maybe take it a little more national in the fall. So thank you so much, Reba Riley, author of Post-Traumatic Church Syndrome, and Paul Young, author of best known for The Shack, but also Crossroads, sorry,
no problem.
And a forthcoming book, which I think is really fascinating, called Eve. So thanks a lot for coming and chatting with me today on this. I'm Christian Piatt, author of Post-Christian, Blood Doctrine, and also one of the co-hosts for the Homebrew Christianity Culture Cast. And hopefully we'll see you on the road.